Beauty so fair to see, light veiled in mystery, glorious the earth and resplendent skies. Pilgrims we march along, singing our joy and song, as blue and earthly paradise. Age after age we rise, beneath eternal skies, into the light from the shadowed past. Still shall our pilgrim songs, buoyant and brave and strong, resound while life and mountains last. Tall are the verdant trees, deep are the flashing seas, glorious wonder the seasons bring. Bright is this sunrise, shining in pilgrim eyes, from which our waking spirits spring. Thank you very much. Beautiful. Before we start today, I want to clear up what may be a misapprehension on the part of some of you. The message today is Guidelines for Living with Dick Smythe. It is not Guidelines for Living with Dick Smythe. And if anybody came under that impression, let me encourage you to consult with Mary during the coffee hour.
Thank you.
It's okay. Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Door County. My name is Hank Wolst, and I'm your service leader this morning. A warm welcome to all in here, out there, everyone, everywhere. Before starting the service, let me remind you to turn off any electronic devices that you might have. That would be nice not to be interrupted by them. First time here, first time in a long while. It's our custom here at UUFDC to invite you to stand and introduce yourself so that we might get to know you a little bit better. And we'll have an opportunity to get to know you even better at the coffee hour after the service back in the gathering room. So if you would like to introduce yourself, please do so. Raise your hand. They'll acknowledge you. You can stand and tell us who you are and where you're from, please. Well, we know you.
You know, yes. I have a few introductions to make. Our quartet, of course. We have our tenor, Dale Stossling, and the alto, Amanda Mitterman, and And everybody knows Hal Halverson. He used to accompany the choir from time to time. And then I have a very important introduction with my sister-in-law, Patty Wiedemann from California. She's from Placentia. And in her lap is the reason I go to the dog shows every December. And this is Boo Wheatley, the hairless Chinese crested, who is the most accomplished Chinese crested the most accomplished dog in his breed in dog agility in the world.
Oh.
So what I told Dick this morning was that I would never want to undermine the levels of his education, but this dog has more letters behind his name than anybody in this world, just to let you know.
Thank you. Anyone else that we should acknowledge as a visitor? Please.
My name is Christine Stile. I drove up from Green Bay, and Karen Winsens invited me to put up the exhibit that's in the gallery.
Thank you.
And, hopefully later I can talk to you a little bit about that.
Super. Thank you.
Devil's Dictionary.
Welcome.
Hi, Diane and Bob, we're here from Minneapolis.
Welcome. What turbulent times trouble and vex our world today. A war visited upon a free and sovereign nation of Ukraine. It's nearly 600 days old now in duration. Untold suffering, material loss, many billions in rubles, dollars, hryvnias, and euros spent in the effort. Thousands of lives lost, civilians and combatants. Grain from 2 world bread baskets, unable to reach those in need, burned at dockside. More thousands of lives lost. And Putin waits for November 2024. A horrific attack in Israel by a people who've had to live horrifically since 1967 in one of 2 small patches of land that were seized by Israel during the Six-Day War and are known as the Palestinian territories. In the Gaza Strip, over 2 million people live in 140 square miles. Door County, you may not know, Door County has nearly 500 square miles, and we have 30,000 people. So put that in perspective. Confined for nearly 60 years in the world's largest outdoor prison. For Gaza, this has meant that Israel retains effective control over Gaza's external affairs, borders, airspace, territorial waters, population registry, tax revenues, and governmental functions. And the effectiveness of this control has been repeatedly emphasized by regular military incursions and rocket attacks. On Saturday, a week ago, the pot boiled over. Both sides lost and both sides lose. We'll starve them out, says Netanyahu, until the hostages are released. And Biden agrees. Climate change sees ice masses melting and seas rising. The Netherlands have floating livestock pasture prototypes. The Seychelles and the Maldives worry about disappearing altogether. Hurricanes aren't necessarily greater in number than they were 100 years ago. They're just far, far, far more intense. The problem will only get worse in the coming decades. The frequency of intense storms will increase, explains Ning Lin, a climate scientist at Princeton University and the lead author of a new study indicating that an ill wind blows and the water rises. Here at home, we're rudderless in a Congress that seems more focused either on perverse populism or on know-nothing nihilism. Party victory is more important than national well-being. Closer to home, a Supreme Court justice is facing potential impeachment before her term really so much as starts. And of course, presiding over all of this is the looming figure of a past president with 4 indictments and 91 felony counts. Let's make him our speaker, some proclaim. What the hell's going on? It's enough to evoke the lines of William Butler Yeats' The Second Coming. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of a passionate intensity. And yet, as a Unitarian Universalist, I cling to the notions that we humans can be better than that. I cling to the notion that despite our abuse of it, nature is never spent, though at what cost to our civilization. I cling to the notion that much as we have been able to overcome and survive the traumas of the past, we will again overcome and survive the traumas of the present. And I think our speaker today, our very own Dick Smythe, while not sugarcoating our present predicaments, especially in the context of the environment, will offer some thoughts and comfort and guidelines as to how and what we can do individually and collectively to cope with these trying times and circumstances. I know that Dick, too, clings to the notion that we can be better than that. This is the time we allot for announcements. What we'd like to do, if you have any announcements that you'd like to share with the fellowship, raise your hand. The microphone will find you, and I will acknowledge you first, obviously, and then you can make the announcement that you'd like to share with the fellowship. So do we have any announcements? Please, Carol?
Good morning. Some of you will remember that.
Is it
Okay,
on?
I guess. There, now we go. Some of you may remember that last fall, a survey was taken in Sister Bay, including Liberty Grove people, about living as seniors in our area. And related to that was the beginning of an effort to provide assistance to us as seniors, as many of us are, and in living in Door County and the area. Since then, a group has begun what we call SAIL, Senior Advocates for Independent Living. This fledgling organization actually meets here in the fellowship on Thursdays every 2 weeks to act as a steering committee to get the organization going. The results from the Age and Place survey showed that 86% of Sister Bay and Liberty Grove residents want to stay in their home as long as possible. We have solutions through the, quote, village model that can help assure that we can remain independent in our homes and engaged in our community. You can learn more about that at a website, and I've got a little poster here with a hashtag on it if you want to check that out. And together we can make our community a great place to fully engage living and age with ease. If you have more questions about it, please see me after the service, and I'll be glad to answer questions for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Other announcements? Okay, Marilyn?
Good morning. I wanted to let everyone know, in case you have an interest, this Thursday at Three Springs, the Door County Land Trust Preserve outside of Sister Bay, where there is a particularly nice barn built in the 1870s. The barn is the home to, at one point, over 800 bats, and of course, I'm bat lady. And the land trust is going out somewhat on a limb and is considering replacing the roof on this barn. And I think it's 99% ready to go for that project. But this will be sort of a get to know the situation with the bats, and also if you're interested in supporting the project. Three Springs Preserve down at the barn between 2 and 4 p.m. this coming Thursday. And the bats would be most grateful if you showed up. Thank you.
Buttons?
Thank you. If you're not aware, there is an opportunity Monday night. The Door County Environmental Council is hosting Dan Egan at Crossroads. Dan is, I'd like to call him our very own. He's not quite our own. He lives in Milwaukee. I believe he's at the School of Freshwater Sciences now. Dan wrote The Life and Death of the Great Lakes. And he has a new book called The Devil's Element. Last couple months ago, when the Environmental Council had Val Klump, the Great Lakes research specialist, speak at the CRES, Dr. Klump spoke quite extensively about the issues with surface water contamination and the dead zone in the bay, and really let us know that there's two problems with that. One is sedimentation and one is phosphorus. Well, Dan's new book is called The Devil's Element. It's all about phosphorus, where it comes from, our history with it. And I'm pretty sure Crossroads is probably jam-packed with reservations in person, but you can Zoom it. So just get online and either through the Environmental Council or through Crossroads. I know it's on their, on their websites. But this is a really important topic for us to understand better how to help keep our water in a better state. Thanks.
Two quick comments on that. One is the main auditorium, I guess, which seats 90, that's sold out. And then they're also going to do a simulcast in an adjacent room, and I think that can seat 25. And when I registered for it the other day, I think we were in numbers 10 and 11 or something, and that was 2 or 3 days ago. So it may very well all be sold out. So if you want to watch it, you may have to do it on Zoom.
They do record it, so
And they record it.
if you can't catch it on Monday, it will be recorded. You can watch it anytime. And I highly recommend watching Val Plump's talk from a couple months ago. That was very informative as well.
And then the other comment is, not to correct you, but I'm going to. The name of the book is actually the Death and Life of the Great Lakes. And that's a nuance, but I think it's an important nuance because it's optimistic in its tone. It doesn't say the life and death. It says the death and life. Any other announcements? I'm never at a loss for words. So, Buttons, would you want to make an announcement about the art crawl coming up next week? And this is going to catch her entirely by surprise. It always
Yes,
does.
it is. A lot of surprises this morning. Yes. The Sturgeon Bay Art Crawl is Saturday and Sunday, the 20th and 21st. There is also an evening preview party at M3, which is the Miller satellite in Sturgeon Bay. It's on 3rd Avenue, and you can meet all of the artists there in one swoop, as well as seeing an example of their work. And of course, I am in it. So thank you.
Okay, you already met Chris Stile when she stood up to introduce herself, and the back of the order of service has some more information. And of course, you can get a lot more information subsequently when you talk to Chris about the Devil's Dictionary installation. I've always loved Ambrose Bierce, and he was the author of the Devil's Dictionary. He was a poet, he was a short story writer, he was a journalist, and he was also kind of a quasi-soldier of fortune who disappeared in Mexico in 1913, 1914, never to be seen again, at the age of 72. The Devil's Dictionary has been called the most brilliant satirical work ever to come out of the United States, ever to come out of America. And I don't know how many are you familiar with it or not, but it's ripe with all these wonderful, wonderful definitions. And I thought I would share with you just a couple of them, okay?
May I,
Please.
I have a little handout that gives an example of the Devil's Dictionary.
Okay.
And you can share.
Okay. And while she's doing that, I'll share a couple of them with you. His definition for air, A-I-R, air, a nutritious substance supplied by a bountiful providence for the fattening of the poor. Conservative, a statesman who is enamored of existing evils, as distinguished, of course, from a liberal who wishes to replace them with others. Egotist, a person of low taste, more interested in himself than in me. A couple of my favorites. Love, a temporary insanity, curable by marriage. Marriage, a household consisting of a master, a mistress, and 2 slaves, making in all 2. And the last, positive. Mistaken at the top of one's voice. Anyway, if you've never heard of the Devil's Dictionary before, you're going to hear more about it later. And I encourage you to check it out, buy it or whatever. It's wonderful of more of that type of richly satiric stuff. Now we'll do the chalice lighting with opening words from Wendell Berry, another favorite. But let me get this thing done first. Maybe. Wendell Berry, who said, "I'd rather rely on Mother Nature's wisdom than man's cleverness." Please stand if willing and able, and join us now in the singing of hymn number 173, In the Branches of the Forest. Trish is going to play it through the first time round because it's probably unfamiliar to most of us. Following the singing of the hymn, please remain standing to recite the unison affirmation and to sing the doxology, both of which are contained in your order of service, by the way. We gather together to seek knowledge and wisdom, to explore freely the vast reaches of mind and spirit, to celebrate within a caring community those truths, ancient and modern, which give meaning and direction to our lives. Joys lift the heart and spirit. Concerns weighs them down. Sharing within a community of friends and family raises a joy to greater heights, or provides balm and lessens the weighty burden of concern. If you have a joy or a concern that you'd like to share, we hope you'll share it. Please note that this service is live streamed, so mention of names and particulars you should not do unless you've already sought and gotten the approval of the person that you're talking about. Buttons again has the microphone, and if you have something you'd like to share with us, joy or concern, please raise your hand. I'll acknowledge you, and Buttons with the mic will find you. Please, Mary. Guidelines for living with Dick.
And I have the mic in my hand. I just need to say that it was such a joy to be at our 10th anniversary celebration for the Climate Change Coalition of Door County. And roughly a quarter of those people there were from UU. And you have been there from the beginning and supported us in all sorts of ways. And so thank you yet once again. You're so vital to our mission.
Thank you for all you've done. Any other joys and concerns? Okay. When I first stepped up to this podium about 4 years ago, I think, for my first stint as service leader, I read a poem by the poet who is my inspiration as a wordsmith, as a lover of nature, and a believer in a greater spirit governing all. Now, that poet is Gerard Manley Hopkins. He was a 19th century English Jesuit priest who possessed an uncanny ability to verbalize his faith with an uncommon sensitivity to sounds and shapes and colors and physical forms and feelings. The poem I read then was called God's Grandeur. It still is called that, and I'm going to read it now. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. Why do men then now not wreck his rod? Generations have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness in deep down things. And though the last lights off the black west went, oh, morning at the brown brink eastward springs. Because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and bright wings. We rely on your generosity of spirit and shekel. As the offering plate passes before you, please give generously. Be mindful that you may also make contributions via our website at uufdc.org. Donate now. And if this is your first time visiting us, please let your presence today be your gift. Thank you, Trish. Now take a moment to find your own peace and solitude, a place of your own, far from the tempest and turmoil of the world around us. Now our guest quartet will sing The Road Home by Michael Dennis Brown.
Tell me where is the road I can call my own, that I left, that I lost so long ago. All these years I have wandered, oh, when will I know? There's a way, there's a road that will lead me home. After wind, after rain, when the dark is done, as I wake from a dream in the cold of day, through the air there's a calling from far away. There's a voice I can hear that will lead me home. Rise up, follow me, come away is the call. With love in your heart as the only song, there is no such beauty as rise up, follow me, I will lead you home.
Thank you so very, very much for that. And now I have the pleasure of turning it over to my friend Dick Smythe.
Good morning, I guess. Hank has already disabused you of any notion that this talk has been ghostwritten by Mary and presented as a survival guide for how to survive for 62 years. But there's another interpretation, and that is that this has been ghostwritten by somebody as a survival guide for all of you folks. Well, how will you survive with this character named Dick Smythe amongst you? And it is not that talk either. So if you're looking forward to either one of those two talks, I have to apologize. This is just not what's going to happen this morning. Guidelines to live by. When I first wrote this talk, I thought about what title to give it. And I thought guidelines sounds presumptuous. It sounds maybe even arrogant. But then it occurred to me that how we react often depends on where we stand. And I remember in this context a rather contentious meeting late in my career with the U.S. Forest Service. It was a contentious meeting. And at one point I became a bit exasperated, pounded the table and said, "Merciful heaven." Well, a colleague on my left leaned over and said softly to me, "Are you sure?" Now, I knew this individual very well. She was a devout Catholic. And her comment had nothing whatsoever to do with the topic we were discussing. It simply reflected her uncertainty about what was going to happen to her and others after death. In other words, her question was, is heaven, quote unquote, really merciful? Can we count on that? Well, I wasn't about to get into a theological discussion with her, so all I said was, well, I'm counting on it. And then we went on. Now, my comment, merciful heaven, had nothing whatsoever to do with my religious belief. It was simply a sanitized version of something more truthfully would go something like, damn, people, come on. We've screwed around with this long enough. Let's get this resolved. Now, those of us with a deeply felt Christian or Jewish religious background may well be thinking, well, what the heck? We know what the greatest commandment is. Why do we need other rules or guidelines? Matthew, Mark, and Luke all repeat a similar version of that commandment. And I will state it using the New Revised Standard Version of Matthew chapter 22, verses 35 through 40. Here it is. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked, "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" And he replied, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Now, people of the Jewish and Christian faith that have familiarity with the Bible's Old Testament might well recognize that both these exchanges are drawn from Scripture. The 6th chapter of Deuteronomy, the 19th chapter of Leviticus. But this stuff has been scattered throughout the Old Testament. Amos, Deuteronomy, Jeremiah, Isaiah, they all make similar comments. So what does one need? Now, even if you consider yourself an atheist or an agnostic, I would hope, that the idea of loving your neighbor as yourself is not a bad guideline for living. However, in these times, I do not believe either one is sufficient. Even while I will acknowledge very honestly the difficulty in trying to obey either one of these. Now, I take some comfort in the fact that Matthew commandment says in part, with all your mind. That is a clear invitation, it seems to me, to think a little bit about your key beliefs or understanding. Well, fair enough, one might say, but isn't it more than a bit presumptuous to suggest that any more guidance is needed? You can judge that after the conclusion of this talk, but in any case, here is my response to that. First, I must acknowledge the influence of Thomas Berry. Now, this is not Wendell Berry, who's worth listening to be sure, but Thomas Berry was a Jesuit priest, died at age 94 a few years ago, 94 a few years ago, taught at Fordham University. And he has been called a historian of world religions, an eco-theologian, and one of the leading environmental thinkers in North America. And in his book, The Dream of the Earth, he reminds us how very fragile our planetary home is. Listen to him. At the very beginning of the universe, the rate of expansion had to be at an infinitesimally precise rate so that the universe would neither explode or collapse. And so it was at the moment of passage out of the radiation stage. Only a fragment of matter escaped annihilation. But out of that fragment has come the galactic system, the solar system, our entire universe. So at the shaping of the solar system, if the Earth were a little closer to the sun, it would be too hot. It would be a little more distant, it would be too cold. If closer to the moon, the tides would overwhelm the continents. If more distant, the seas would be stagnant, and development of life could not have taken place. And so it is true with the radius of the Earth, the size of the Earth. If it were a little larger, the Earth would be more gaseous, like Jupiter. If a little smaller, the Earth would be more solid, like Mars. And in neither case, could life as we know it today have evolved. So given all that, the continued proper functioning of planet Earth has, for better or for worse, become increasingly dependent on human wisdom. We need to understand, we really do need to understand, that the Earth is a single community that will survive in its integrity if it is to support any nation on Earth. In another book, The Christian Future and Fate of the Earth, Berry reminds us that our only security is a shared commitment to preserve the integrity of the planetary home. Or to restate it, the human community and the natural world will go into the future as a single sacred community, or it will not go at all. In Berry's view, what is preventing such a commitment is that our present Western culture is so totally human-dominated, so human-focused, and committed to human values. Now, religious folks for thousands of years have been primarily concerned with the divine human and the human-human relationship, as suggested by the two commandments I read, love of God and love of neighbor. But Berry believed, and I'm now suggesting, that is no longer sufficient. We need a third commitment. We need a third commandment, a new component of our belief system. And this component must address the protection of the natural world, without which human life as we know it today simply will not survive. It's just that simple. Now, Berry clearly stated this need in several of his books, but the best I can tell, he never presented any exact wording. So let me suggest a brief statement. You shall love, nourish, and protect planet Earth and seek to understand it at a fundamental level. Now, this shouldn't come as any surprise to any of us. Our service leader, Hank, in one of his president's columns, listed our principles, and there are 5 of them. This is our mission. Our 4th mission statement is this: practice conscientious stewardship of the earth on which all life depends. That's our mission statement. That's one of our 5 mission statements. Practice conscientious stewardship of the earth on which all life depends. Or in other words, as Douglas Chadwick proposed, adapt the golden rule: doing to others as you would have them do unto you, as do under ecosystems as you would have them do unto you. Now, I accept all this. This all sounds okay, but there's a catch to this. And it's a very important catch. And that's what I want to emphasize now. Hidden in all this is a rather obvious truth that we cannot protect, we cannot nourish that which we don't understand at a fairly fundamental level. You simply can't do it. And it's painfully obvious that we don't yet understand very much about our natural world. And I'll have more to say about that in a few minutes. Now, Barry reminds us that no human accomplishment can replace what we are losing. We and our children are becoming autistic in relation to the natural world. We don't seem to realize that this planet is a communion of subjects, a collection of objects to be exploited solely for economic gain. Our great failure is the termination of existence of thousands of species. And the primary cause of this devastation is the belief that all rights belong to us human beings, and the non-human creatures that seem to have no value other than their potential use to us humans. And I'm suggesting this morning that that is tragic. That's an absolute tragic assumption and belief. So, the first significant influence on my thinking was Thomas Berry. More recently, I've been influenced by Pope Francis and his encyclical Laudato Si, Praise Be to You. And he's just updated that in a very short 12-page piece. This article, this writing, is in essence a profound critique on the way we humans now live. And he emphasized again and again and again in Laudato Si that natural environments like social environments need protection. Our protection. In his view, nature was once something sacred to be respected and cooperated with. But then came the triumph of science and industry on the back of a population explosion. Now, some would say we're on the path of destruction. Laudato Si points to a greater ecological awareness that eschews the false promises of technology and consumerism. We've just got to understand that we, we humans are part of nature. And planet Earth is a homeland not just for us, it's a homeland for every living creature. The Pope has reminded us that we do not yet have an awareness of the sin, he calls it a sin, the sin of creating violence against nature and creation. And he emphasized, we need this awareness. And then finally, the third author, to whom I must express both my indebtedness and admiration, is Sean Carroll. Carroll is an award-winning scientist, author, educator, and film producer. He's vice president of science education at the Howard Hughes Memorial Institute and a professor of molecular biology and genetics, at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And he wrote a very interesting short book, The Serengeti Rules, the quest to discover how life works and why it matters. And he began this book with a quote from Thomas Huxley back in 1868. And it explains precisely my concern about our lack of understanding of how our planetary home functions. Now, please keep in mind, these words are over 150 years old. These weren't new. Here's a quote. Suppose it were perfectly certain that the life and fortune of every one of us would one day depend upon his winning or losing a game of chess. Don't you think that we should all consider it to be a primary duty to learn at least the names and the moves of the various pieces? Yet it is a very plain and elementary truth that the life, the fortune, and the happiness of every one of us do depend upon our knowing something of the rules of the game, which is infinitely more difficult and complicated than chess. It's a game that has been played for untold ages. The chessboard is the world. The pieces are the phenomenon of nature, and the rules of the game are what we now call the laws of nature. So, if we are to love, nourish, protect, and understand planet Earth, what are these rules? Well, we must understand at least something of them. So here are a couple of responses to that question. One answer comes from the biblical scholar, Sally McFaig. And she has written what she calls creation's house rules. They're very simple. Take only your share. Clean up after yourself. Keep the house in good repair for others. Good advice. But I don't think it's sufficient. Professor Carroll, in his gem of a little book, proposes two overarching principles. First, every process in the healthy body, and I stress healthy here, every process in the healthy body, every kind of molecule, every cell type, is produced and maintained within very strict limits. Second, anything that is true of bacteria is also true of elephants. In short, everything in our world is regulated. And understanding these regulations and how they interact with each other are the primary aims of molecular biology, physiology, and ecology. From bacteria to elephants, these interactions, these regulations are absolutely key. So let me briefly explain. Sometimes these interactions are very simple and straightforward. For example, you introduce wolves into Yellowstone. What happens? Elk population declines. Why? Well, wolves eat elk. Simple. End of story. Not quite. It's the end of the story for us. But I will ignore the many related changes other than the decline of elk population that result from the introduction of wolves into Yellowstone. And sometimes these interaction and regulations are not quite that simple. In fact, they're pretty darn tricky. Here's the study of an intertidal pool off the northwest coast of British Columbia. One little pool. He also demonstrated that if you remove just one species of starfish, you decrease the population of some other species, you increase the population of some other species, you reduce the overall diversity of that intertidal pool from 15 species to 8, just from taking out one species. Regulations, regulations, interactions, interactions. To emphasize this issue of failure to understand how the natural world works, I think again and again and again of the concern expressed by Aldo Leopold when he wrote, one of the penalties of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. Yes, the damage we have done to the earth and the damage we continue to do is simply invisible, invisible to most of us. Why? We just don't understand. We just don't understand. Now, I am not suggesting you all need to become microbiologists or ecologists. That would be an awful world. And I wouldn't want to live in that world. But I am suggesting we need to care enough and appreciate that the proper functioning of this planetary home of ours is not only key to our survival, but unfortunately is now almost totally dependent on us, Homo sapiens, living up to our scientific name, wise humans. I want to share with you 2 examples in closing here where we failed big time, because we just didn't understand the rules of the game. And these are both very true stories. Humans have cultivated rice for more than 6,000 years, and it remains a dietary staple for several billion people today. And today's lush rice fields are the products of what you no doubt remember as the Green Revolution in the 1960s. This revolution included the development of genetically improved rice varieties and the routine application of fertilizers and pesticides. Within 10 years, many farmers saw their rice yields double. A great success story. Not really. In 1976, disaster struck. It struck in the form of a tiny insect called the brown plant hopper, a little bitty rascal about this big. In the time it takes one rice plant to mature, the number of these plant hoppers exploded and overwhelmed the field, going from less than 1 insect per plant to somewhere between 500 and 1,000 insects for every rice plant. Many farmers lost everything. And Indonesia turned from being the largest rice exporter to the largest rice importer. The insecticide treatments had caused an 800-fold increase in insect numbers. So what happened? What's going on here? Well, there are a number of things going on here. First, the plant hoppers had developed resistance to the frequently applied insecticides that they're exposed to over and over again. Second, and more surprising really, the pesticide actually increased the rate of egg laying by about 2.5 times. Now, this is not a normal happening. And finally, the pesticide treatments killed the spiders and other natural enemies of the plant hoppers. So, the ultimate cause of too many plant hoppers resulted from us putting too much insecticide again and again and again on these fields. Speaking as an entomologist for a minute here now, it also reflected why we simply have to install immediate and continuing monitoring of pesticide treatments. We just must do this. And we humans have been making similar mistakes for decades. And for a while, we could say, oh, I just didn't understand. I didn't know. Can't do that anymore. This has been known for a long time. I will end with one more story. Again, a true story. The ignorance and arrogance of the U.S. military and the White House displayed in this story are simply breathtaking, simply breathtaking. The result was both tragic and comic. This World War II story could hardly demonstrate more clearly how a lack of understanding of the natural world, in this case, the behavior of bats, can lead to significant unanticipated problems. Unfortunately, public relations have never run smoothly for the bat. Along with the vulture, the bat and the vulture are two of the few animals in the Bible listed as unclean. Unclean. Now that's really ironic because bats will spend up to 1/5 of their total living time grooming themselves, which suggests that the bats were probably much cleaner than were these ancient biblical scribes. Nonetheless, we implored and killed thousands and thousands of these innocent creatures in the war effort. Here's what happened. A 60-year-old dentist was coming home from a vacation in New Mexico, and he was shocked and outraged by the attack on Pearl Harbor. And he began to ponder, how could the U.S. retaliate? And he recalled the clouds of bats, literally clouds of bats, leaving the famous Carlsbad Caverns he'd seen earlier in his vacation. Maybe some of you folks have witnessed this. And then a presumed light bulb went on. And he thought, what if tiny bombs were strapped to thousands of bats and released in the Japanese cities? Well, the bats would naturally seek refuge in the nooks and crannies of Japanese homes. The bombs would explode. The Japanese people would die by the thousands. So what could possibly go wrong with this idea? Actually, quite a lot not only could go wrong, but did go wrong. Now let's remember a couple of things. At this time, our technology had yet to contrive a bomb lighter than a can of beans. A can of beans. Now this would be a bit of a struggle for an animal the size of a mouse to lift off the ground, let alone carry in flight. Another problem was that remote detonation was also very much in its infancy. We take it for granted now, but it wasn't so then. And then there was a very awkward problem. This just blows my mind. There was a very awkward problem that, unlike other military conscripts, and we've used a variety of pigeons and porpoises and dogs and even in a couple of cases horses in wartime. They can be trained to follow human commands. Have you ever tried training a bat? It ain't possible. It just ain't possible. So despite these screaming flaws, which should have been patently obvious, and I might add, ignoring the morality of deliberately planning to kill thousands and thousands of innocent creatures, the dentist idea was given the green light for funding by the military. It seems like this dentist, well, I know, I read, this dentist had friends in very high places, in this case, the White House. So the first and easiest step was to capture thousands of bats as they emerged from the caves of Carlsbad Caverns. This was pretty easy. Then a bomb had to be developed. It was much lighter than a can of beans, light enough for a teeny half-ounce bat to carry in flight. And we did it. We did it. We developed small bombs like this. So in due time, the scientists and military ran a test using real incendiary devices. This took place less than 2 years after the dentist had hatched his harebrained scheme. Now, if I were to stand up here and say that things did not go exactly as planned, that would be a huge, huge understatement. And one Captain Carl gave this report of what happened. He stated somewhat evasively that testing was concluded. Quote, when a fire destroyed a large portion of the test material. Now, what he failed to mention was that the barracks, the control tower, and countless other buildings at the Carlsbad Auxiliary Field Station were spectacularly all set ablaze by a bunch of bomb-carrying bats. And ironically, because this was a military base and wartime, civilian firefighters could not gain entry to the base. So all the military could do was retreat to a safe distance and watch as the fires leapt from building to building to building and destroyed virtually the entire base. And then this is just nobody could write this. Nobody would believe it. A couple of winged missiles, i.e. bats, went AWOL. And these bats then took up residence under the car of the base's general. Needless to say, the general needed a new car. Now, this incredibly stupid project never recovered from the ignominious calamity, and of course, the U.S. never recovered the millions of dollars wasted on this imbecilic activity. Clearly, neither the president nor the military had any understanding of bats. Thomas Berry has proposed as a necessary development that we must once again establish an awareness of the unity of human affairs with the functioning of the universe. The unity of human affairs with the functioning of the universe. This is absolutely necessary because the proper functioning of the planet has become increasingly dependent almost entirely on human wisdom and human decision making. Are we wise enough? Do we care enough to try and learn and keep in mind some elementary understanding of how this homeland of ours is supposed to function? Barry put it this way. All human institutions, professions, programs, and activities must now be judged primarily by the extent to which they inhibit, ignore, or foster a mutually enhancing human-Earth relationship. I agree with that statement completely. I want to conclude my remarks this morning by first quoting a letter from Stuart Udall to his grandkids on Christmas Eve, 2008. Now, you probably remember that Udall was the Secretary of the Interior under Kennedy and Johnson, 1961 and 1969. This is what he wrote to his grandkids. Whether you are a person of faith who believes the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, whether you are an individual who has had mystical experiences that link you to the network of eternity, or whether you are a fervent conservationist who wants to leave a legacy for your progeny, the earth needs your devotion and tender care. Go well, my children. Do well. Support all endeavors that promise a better life for the inhabitants of our planet. Cherish sunsets, wild creations, wild places. Have a love affair with the wonder and beauty of our planetary home. My last statement then, I owe to Wendell Berry. This is Wendell Berry now. I do not doubt that it is only on the condition of humility and reverence before the world that our species will be able to remain in it. Yes, humility and reverence. And I would have to add to that a reasonable, modest understanding of how this planetary home of ours is supposed to function, including bats. Are we wise enough? Do we care enough? No, geez.
Thank you, Dick. Guidelines we should heed. Please stand if willing and able, and join now in the singing of hymn 159, This Is My Song. A song of peace for their land. I too, Dick, I'm going to close with words from Wallace Beery, who said, among many things, who said, "To cherish what remains of the earth and to foster its renewal is our only chance for survival." Following the postlude, please join us in the gathering room for coffee and conversation. And then after about 15 minutes, the chimes will ring, signaling that we'll have a talk back here and have an opportunity to talk with Dick, he with us with him. And we'll take about 15, 20 minutes to do that. And then following that, of course, Chris, you'll have a chance to talk with Chris in the gathering room in that 15 minutes of coffee, but then subsequent to the talk back, you can talk with her even more. And I think she might have some prepared remarks, maybe? Is that the case, Chris? About the Devil's Dictionary and the art installation that she has put together. So now the postlude for The Beauty of the Earth.